The sound of splintering wood and a woman's scream pierced the afternoon air just as Phineas O'Donnell was riding past the old mining trail west of Eureka, California, and without thinking, he kicked his boots free of the stirrups and was running toward the edge of the ravine before his horse even came to a full stop. The year was 1878, and the Northern California landscape stretched out in rugged beauty, all dusty earth and scattered pines, the kind of country that could kill a person as easily as sustain them. Phineas reached the crumbling edge and looked down into the 30-foot drop, his heart hammering against his ribs as he spotted her halfway down, clinging to a twisted juniper root that was already pulling loose from the rocky soil. "Hold on!" he shouted, his voice carrying down to where she hung suspended above the jagged rocks below. The woman looked up, her face pale beneath the film of dust, dark hair falling loose from its pins. She was young, maybe 23 or 24, wearing a riding dress that had seen better days, now torn and dirty from the fall. Her eyes were wide with fear, but not panic, not yet. And Phineas could see she was trying to find footing on the crumbling slope. "The root is giving way," she called back, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. "I cannot hold much longer." Phineas scanned the ravine wall, calculating angles and handholds with the practiced eye of a man who had spent his 26 years in rough country. The trail she had been riding had given way completely, the wooden bridge that once spanned this section now lying in splinters at the bottom. He could see her horse in the distance, having made it to the other side before the collapse, now standing confused and riderless. Without a second thought, he began his descent into the ravine, using the same juniper bushes and rock outcroppings that dotted the steep slope. His hands found purchase on sun-warmed stone, his boots digging into loose soil that cascaded down in small avalanches. He had climbed worse in his years working cattle drives through the Siskiyou Mountains, but never with such urgency driving him forward. "What is your name?" he asked as he worked his way closer, keeping his voice conversational to help keep her calm. "Amelia," she answered, and he could hear the strain in her voice now as her fingers slipped another inch. "Amelia Foster. I was riding to the Morrison Ranch." "Well, Miss Foster, I am Phineas O'Donnell, and I'm going to get you out of this predicament." He was close enough now to see the cuts on her hands from gripping the rough bark, the way her shoulders shook from the effort of holding her own weight. "When I reach you, I need you to trust me completely. Can you do that? Do I have much choice?" Despite everything, there was a hint of dry humor in her response that made him like her immediately. Phineas positioned himself on a relatively stable outcropping just below and to the left of where she hung. The juniper root gave an ominous creak, and small pebbles rained down. "When I say so, you are going to let go with your left hand and reach for me. I will catch you." "That is madness," she said, but he could hear her readying herself anyway. "Madness would be staying where you are," he replied. "On 3. 1, 2, 3. Amelia released her grip and swung toward him, her hand outstretched. Phineas caught her wrist in a firm grip, just as the juniper root tore free completely, sending it tumbling down into the ravine below. For a moment, she dangled from his hold, her eyes locked on his, and he saw the absolute trust there that she had given a complete stranger. Using all his strength, he pulled her against the slope, guiding her feet to the outcropping beside him. They stood pressed together in the small space, both breathing hard, her hand still clasped in his. This close, he could see her eyes were a deep brown, intelligent and fierce even in fear. She smelled of dust and sage and something floral that reminded him of the wild roses that grew near creek beds. "Thank you," she whispered, and the sincerity in those 2 words struck something deep in his chest. "We are not safe yet," he said, reluctantly releasing her hand. "The climb back up is going to be harder. Can you manage it if I guide you?" She looked up at the distance they needed to cover and set her jaw. "I can manage anything required of me." The ascent was slow and painstaking. Phineas went first, testing each handhold before directing her to follow. When her boot slipped on loose shale, he braced himself below her, his hand steadying her ankle. When her arms trembled with exhaustion, he found a narrow ledge where they could rest, and he positioned himself between her and the drop, just in case. "How did you happen to be riding past at exactly the right moment?" she asked during one of these brief respites. Sweat traced clean lines through the dust on her face. "I was heading back to my ranch after delivering some horses to a buyer in Eureka," he explained. Another 10 minutes either direction, and I would have missed you entirely. Then I am fortunate in your timing, Mr. O'Donnell. Phineas, he corrected. I think nearly dying together puts us past formalities. A small smile touched her lips. Then you must call me Amelia. They continued climbing, and Phineas found himself acutely aware of her presence behind him, the soft sounds of her breathing, the rustle of her torn skirts against the rock. When they were 10 feet from the top, his hand closed around a stone that immediately came loose, and he had to throw himself flat against the slope to avoid sliding backward into her. The stone bounced past her, missing her by inches, and continued down to shatter at the bottom. "Are you hurt?" she asked, her hand touching his boot in concern. "My pride more than anything," he admitted, finding a more solid grip. "Almost there now." When they finally reached the top, Phineas pulled himself over the edge and then turned to offer both hands to Amelia. She grasped them without hesitation, and he hauled her up and over, both of them collapsing onto solid ground. For a long moment, they simply lay there on their backs, staring up at the cloudless California sky, too grateful for stable earth to move. "I have never been so happy to see flat ground," Amelia said finally, and then, to his surprise, she began to laugh. It was not hysterical laughter, but genuine mirth, the kind that comes after surviving something terrible. Phineas found himself joining her, and they lay there on the dusty trail, laughing like fools. When the laughter subsided, he rolled to his side to look at her properly. Her hair had come completely loose, falling in dark waves around her shoulders. Her dress was ruined, torn at the sleeve and hem, and she had a scrape across her cheek that would likely bruise. She was, he thought, the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. "We should get you to a doctor," he said, sitting up. "Those hands need tending." Amelia examined her palms, which were raw and bleeding in places. "I have had worse," she said, but she let him help her to her feet. She swayed slightly, and he steadied her with a hand at her elbow. "Your horse ran off that direction," Phineas said, pointing, "but he will not have gone far. My horse is just over there. Let me retrieve him, and we can track yours down." His buckskin gelding, Jasper, was exactly where he had left him, ground-tied and calmly cropping grass, as though his rider had not just risked his neck. Phineas stroked the horse's neck and gathered the reins, leading him back to where Amelia stood at the edge of the ravine, looking down at the drop she had nearly fallen the full distance of. "That bridge has been unsafe for months," she said quietly. "I should have taken the long route, but I was running late and thought I could make it across." "Running late for what?" Phineas asked, then caught himself. "Forgive me, that is none of my business." "No, it is a fair question after you saved my life." She turned away from the ravine, and he saw her straighten her shoulders, pulling together the composure that had temporarily slipped. "I am interviewing for a position as governess at the Morrison Ranch. I was meant to arrive by 3 o'clock. Phineas glanced at the sun's position. "It is well past 4 now. We need to find your horse and get you there, or at least get word to them about what happened." They walked along the trail, following the tracks of Amelia's horse, with Phineas leading Jasper and staying close to Amelia in case her shaky legs gave out. She was trying to hide it, but he could see the delayed shock setting in, the way her hands trembled slightly when she thought he was not looking. "Have you been a governess before?" he asked, partly to distract her, and partly because he was genuinely curious about this woman who had fallen into his life so dramatically. "I taught at a school in Sacramento for 2 years, she replied. "But the position ended when the school closed due to lack of funding. I have been staying with my aunt in Eureka while seeking new employment. The Morrison family has 3 children who need instruction, and the pay would be enough to eventually save for my own future." "What kind of future?" She glanced at him, a spark of something fierce and determined in her eyes. "One where I am not dependent on anyone else's charity. I have no parents living, Mr. O'Donnell. My father died in the war, and my mother passed from fever when I was 17. I have been making my own way since then, and I intend to continue doing so." Phineas found himself admiring her even more. In 1878, a woman alone in the world faced considerable challenges, and yet here she was, determined to carve out her own place. They found her horse, a pretty bay mare, standing near a creek and looking somewhat abashed at having abandoned her rider. Amelia approached slowly, speaking soft words, and the mare nickered in greeting. "There you are, Clementine," Amelia murmured, stroking the mare's neck. "Some help you were." Phineas checked the mare over and found her sound, though the saddle had twisted in the ordeal. He set about fixing it, aware of Amelia watching him work. When he finished, he turned to find her looking at her torn dress with dismay. "I cannot arrive at the Morrison Ranch looking like this," she said. "They will think me completely unsuitable." "You look like someone who survived a dangerous accident," Phineas said firmly. "Anyone with sense will understand that. But if you would like, there is a stream another mile up where you could wash up a bit. I have a clean bandana you could use for your hands." She considered this, then nodded. "That would help, thank you." They rode together to the stream, and Phineas gave her privacy, while she did her best to repair her appearance. When she emerged from the trees, she had secured her hair back into a simple bun, washed the worst of the dust from her face and hands, and used his bandana to wrap her most damaged palm. The dress was still torn, but she had pinned it as best she could. "Better?" she asked. "You look fine," he said, and meant it. She looked real and strong and wholly herself, not primped and artificial like some of the town ladies he had encountered. "But let me ride with you to the Morrison place. You have been through an ordeal, and I want to make sure you arrive safely. Also, I can explain to them what happened if they need convincing." "I would appreciate that," Amelia admitted. "I confess I am feeling rather more shaken than I would like to admit." Phineas mounted Jasper, and they set out at an easy pace, riding side by side on the wide trail. The afternoon sun slanted through the pines, painting everything in shades of gold. Birds called from the branches, and somewhere in the distance a cow lowed. It was peaceful country, beautiful in its rough way, and Phineas found himself hoping that Amelia would come to love it as he did. "How long have you had your ranch?" Amelia asked as they rode. 3 years now," he replied. "I worked cattle drives and saved every penny for nearly 8 years to afford the land and starting stock. It is not a large operation yet, but it is mine. I run about 200 head of cattle and breed horses on the side. Good ranch horses mostly, sturdy animals that can handle mountain country. It sounds like you have worked very hard for what you have. Same as you," he pointed out. "Building something from nothing takes time and determination, whether it is a ranch or a future." They talked as they rode, the conversation flowing easily despite having just met. Phineas learned that Amelia had a passion for literature and had once dreamed of being a writer herself. She learned that he had grown up on a small farm in Missouri and had come west after his parents died in a cholera outbreak, seeking a fresh start in new country. They discovered they were both voracious readers, both loved horses, and both had a stubborn independent streak that had occasionally gotten them into trouble. The Morrison Ranch came into view as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. It was a prosperous spread, with a large main house, several outbuildings, and extensive corrals. Cattle dotted the pastures, and Phineas could see ranch hands working in the distance. This was exactly the kind of place that would need a governess, wealthy enough to afford the luxury of education for their children. Mrs. Morrison herself came out to greet them, a handsome woman in her 40s with keen eyes that took in Amelia's disheveled state immediately. "Miss Foster, we were beginning to worry when you did not arrive at the appointed time." Amelia dismounted, and Phineas saw her wince as her sore muscles protested. "I apologize for my tardiness and appearance, Mrs. Morrison. The old bridge on the Western Trail collapsed as I was crossing, and I would have been seriously injured or worse if not for Mr. O'Donnell here coming to my aid." Phineas dismounted as well, removing his hat respectfully. "Madam, I witnessed the accident. Miss Foster showed remarkable courage throughout a very dangerous situation. The bridge gave way completely, and she fell partway into the ravine before catching herself. I was able to help her climb back up, but it was a near thing." "Mrs.?" Morrison's expression shifted from stern to concerned. "My dear girl, you must be terrified. Come inside at once. We can conduct the interview another time." "If it is all the same to you, madam, I would prefer to proceed as planned," Amelia said, and Phineas heard the steel in her voice. "I do not wish for my first impression to be one of delicacy. I am quite capable of fulfilling the duties you require, and I hope you will give me the opportunity to demonstrate that." "Mrs.?" Morrison studied her for a long moment, then smiled. "I think I like you already, Miss Foster." "Very well, come inside. Mr. O'Donnell, would you care to join us for supper? It is the least we can offer after your heroism today." Phineas started to decline, not wanting to intrude, but Amelia caught his eye and gave him a look that clearly said she would appreciate his presence. "I would be honored, madam. Thank you." The interior of the Morrison house was comfortable and well appointed, with the kind of solid furniture that suggested permanence and prosperity. Mrs. Morrison showed Amelia to a room where she could properly wash and change into a borrowed dress while hers was cleaned and mended. Phineas was given a basin to wash up as well, and he did his best to make himself presentable. When Amelia reappeared, wearing a simple blue dress that Mrs. Morrison had lent her, Phineas found himself staring. With the dust and fear washed away, she was even lovelier than he had thought. But it was not just her beauty that drew him. It was the intelligent light in her eyes, the determined set of her chin, the way she moved with quiet confidence despite everything she had been through. The interview took place in the parlor, with Mr. Morrison joining his wife and their 3 children, 2 boys aged 8 and 10, and a girl of 6. Phineas sat quietly to the side, ostensibly there as a witness to the day's events, but really just wanting to stay near Amelia a little longer. He watched as she answered questions about her teaching philosophy, demonstrated her knowledge of various subjects, and engaged the children in a way that had them warming to her immediately. "Can you teach us about horses?" the youngest boy, Timothy, asked eagerly. "I want to know everything about horses." "I can teach you about many things, including horses," Amelia replied with a smile, "though I suspect Mr. O'Donnell here knows far more about horses than I do, given that he breeds them." 3 pairs of young eyes turned to Phineas with interest, and suddenly he found himself being peppered with questions about his ranch, his horses, and what it was like to work with cattle. He answered as best he could, amused by their enthusiasm and warmed by the grateful look Amelia sent him for engaging with the children. By the time supper was served, it was clear that the Morrison family was charmed by Amelia. The meal was hearty ranch fare, beef and potatoes and fresh bread, and Phineas ate with the appetite of a man who had expended considerable energy that afternoon. The conversation flowed around the table, covering everything from local news to book recommendations to discussion of the upcoming territorial fair. "Miss Foster," Mr. Morrison said as the meal wound down, "my wife and I would like to offer you the position, if you are still interested. You would have room and board here, Sunday afternoons off, and a salary of $30 per month." Phineas saw the relief and joy flash across Amelia's face before she composed herself into appropriate gratitude. "I accept with pleasure, Mr. and Mrs. Morrison. Thank you for this opportunity." "Can you start on Monday?" Mrs. Morrison asked. "That gives you a few days to settle your affairs in town and recover from today's excitement." "Monday would be perfect." After supper, Phineas knew he should take his leave and return to his ranch. It was already growing dark, and he had evening chores waiting, but he found himself reluctant to say goodbye to Amelia, this brave, fascinating woman who had entered his life so unexpectedly. When he finally stood to go, she walked with him out to where Jasper was tied. "I do not know how to properly thank you," she said quietly, the 2 of them standing in the gathering dusk. "You saved my life today, Phineas." "Anyone would have done the same," he said, though they both knew that was not entirely true. Not everyone would have climbed into that ravine without a second thought. "No," she said firmly, "not everyone. You did not hesitate, did not calculate the risk to yourself. You just acted. That speaks to who you are as a person." He felt himself flush at the praise. "I am just glad I was there. The thought of you falling all the way down into that ravine, and no one knowing, no one able to help." He trailed off, surprised by the emotion that welled up at the thought. "But I did not fall, thanks to you." She placed her hand on his arm, and even through his shirt sleeve, he felt the warmth of her touch. "Will I see you again? Or does saving someone's life entitle you to never have to deal with them afterwards?" He laughed at that, the tension breaking. "I would very much like to see you again, if that would be acceptable. Perhaps I could call on you here, once you are settled." "I would like that," she said, and her smile was soft and genuine in the twilight. "I would like that very much." Phineas rode home through the darkness, his mind full of dark-haired woman with fierce determination and a smile that made his heart beat faster. It was foolish, he told himself, to be so affected by someone he had only just met. And yet he could not deny that something had shifted in him that afternoon, something fundamental and profound. He had climbed into that ravine to save a stranger, but the woman he had carried up on his own back had somehow become important to him in the space of a few hours. The next 3 days passed with excruciating slowness. Phineas threw himself into ranch work, repairing fences and working with a difficult young stallion he was training, but his mind kept drifting back to Amelia. Was she well? Had her hands healed? Was she nervous about starting her new position? He wanted to ride over immediately, but forced himself to wait, not wanting to seem too eager or interfere with her preparations. On Sunday afternoon, he finally allowed himself to ride to the Morrison Ranch, carrying a bundle wrapped in brown paper. He had agonized over whether to bring a gift and what would be appropriate. In the end, he had settled on a book, a volume of poetry he thought she might enjoy based on their conversation, and a jar of his housekeeper's excellent salve for healing cuts and scrapes. Mrs. Morrison answered his knock and smiled knowingly. "Mr. O'Donnell, how nice to see you again. I believe Miss Foster is in the garden with the children. Shall I show you the way?" He followed her through the house and out to a well-tended garden where Amelia sat on a bench. The Morrison children gathered around her. She was reading aloud from a book, doing different voices for different characters, and the children were enthralled. Phineas stood back for a moment, watching her in her element, and felt his heart do something complicated in his chest. She looked up and saw him, and the smile that lit her face made the 3-day wait worthwhile. "Phineas, what a lovely surprise." The children groaned at the interruption, but Mrs. Morrison shooed them off to other activities, leaving Phineas and Amelia alone in the garden. He suddenly felt awkward, this confident rancher who could handle any horse or cow, but who fumbled for words in the presence of this woman. "I brought you something," he said, holding out the package. "I hope that is not too forward." Amelia unwrapped it carefully, her face lighting up when she saw the book. "Shakespeare's sonnets! Oh, Phineas, this is wonderful. I left most of my books in Sacramento when I moved, and I have missed having poetry to read." She opened the jar of salve and sniffed it appreciatively. "And this smells medicinal, for my hands." "If they are still bothering you," he said, "my housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, makes it. She says it will help them heal faster." "That is very thoughtful." She held out her palms, which were indeed still red and healing. "They are much better, but still tender. Thank you." They walked through the garden together, and Amelia told him about her first day at the Morrison Ranch. The children were bright and eager to learn, she said, though the older boy tested boundaries and the little girl was shy. She was working on lesson plans and figuring out the rhythm of the household. Phineas told her about the progress he was making with the difficult stallion and about his plans to expand his herd next spring. "Would you like to see my ranch sometime?" he asked, the words coming out in a rush. "I mean, properly see it. You could come for Sunday dinner, perhaps, meet Mrs. Chen. She is an excellent cook, and she would love to meet you." "I would like that very much," Amelia said. "Next Sunday? Mrs. Morrison has given me every Sunday afternoon off." "Next Sunday it is, then." They talked until the shadows grew long, and Phineas knew he needed to head home. This time, when he said goodbye, Amelia took his hand and squeezed it gently. "Thank you for coming to see me, and for the gifts. I will treasure the book." "Until next Sunday," he said, reluctant to release her hand. "Until next Sunday," she echoed. The week that followed was the longest of Phineas's life. He found himself working with renewed energy, wanting everything at his ranch to be perfect for Amelia's visit. He repaired the front porch railing, whitewashed the fence around the main house, and even convinced himself to tackle the weeds that had overtaken the flower beds his mother had planted before she died. Mrs. Chen watched all this activity with knowing eyes, but said nothing, though she did insist on making her special almond cookies for their expected guest. Sunday dawned bright and clear, and Phineas rode to the Morrison Ranch with his heart in his throat. Amelia was waiting, dressed in a simple green dress that brought out the warmth in her brown eyes. She had borrowed a horse from the Morrisons, and they rode back to his ranch side by side, talking about everything and nothing. The O'Donnell ranch was modest compared to the Morrison spread, but Phineas had built it with his own hands and was proud of every fence post and beam. The main house was small but well constructed, with a wide porch that caught the afternoon sun. The barn was sturdy, the corrals well maintained, and his small herd of cattle grazed contentedly in the pastures beyond. "It is wonderful," Amelia said, and he could hear the sincerity in her voice. "You can see the care you have put into everything." Mrs. Chen came out to meet them, a tiny Chinese woman in her 60s with a face like weathered silk and eyes that missed nothing. She had come to California during the gold rush and stayed after her husband died, eventually finding work as a housekeeper for various ranches. Phineas had hired her 2 years ago, and she ran his household with quiet efficiency. "So, this is the young lady you pulled from the ravine, Mrs." Chen said, looking Amelia up and down with frank appraisal. "You did not tell me she was so pretty." Phineas felt his face heat. "Mrs. Chen," but Amelia just laughed, not the least bit offended. "And you did not tell me your housekeeper was so direct. I think we will get along wonderfully, Mrs. Chen." The older woman smiled, clearly pleased. "Come, dinner is almost ready. You must be hungry from the ride." They ate on the porch, enjoying the cool breeze and the view of the mountains in the distance. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself, preparing roasted chicken, fresh vegetables from the garden, and her famous almond cookies for dessert. The conversation flowed easily, with Mrs. Chen asking Amelia about her teaching and sharing stories of her own experiences coming to America. After dinner, Phineas showed Amelia around the ranch properly. They visited the barn, where she met his horses and cooed over a new foal. They walked through the pastures, and he pointed out landmarks and explained his plans for expansion. They ended up at a spot near a creek where wildflowers grew in profusion, and they sat on a fallen log, watching the water flow past. "I can see why you love it here," Amelia said. "There is something peaceful about this place, even with all the hard work involved." "It is home," Phineas said simply. "The first real home I have had since my parents died. I built it with my own hands, every bit of it, and no one can take it from me." "I understand that feeling," she said quietly. "The desire for something that is truly yours, that you have earned. That is why I was so determined to get the governess position, even after falling into a ravine." He turned to look at her, this remarkable woman who had somehow become essential to him in the space of 2 weeks. The afternoon sun caught in her hair, turning it to burnished mahogany, and when she met his eyes, he saw his own feelings reflected there. "Amelia," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "I know we have not known each other long, and maybe this is too fast, but I cannot stop thinking about you. From the moment I saw you in that ravine, fighting to hold on, you have been in my thoughts constantly. I find myself wanting to tell you about my day, to hear about yours, to share everything with you." "Phineas," she said softly, reaching for his hand, "I feel the same way. I keep telling myself it is gratitude, that I am confusing the intensity of being rescued with genuine feeling, but I know that is not true. What I feel for you is real and has nothing to do with the circumstances of our meeting." "Then where do we go from here?" he asked. "You have your position at the Morrison Ranch, and I have responsibilities here. I do not want to rush you or make you feel obligated in any way." "You are not," she assured him. "But I think we should take our time, get to know each other properly, continue these Sunday visits, perhaps write letters during the week, see where this leads naturally." "That sounds wise," he agreed, though part of him wanted to throw caution to the wind and declare his love right then and there. But Amelia deserved better than hasty declarations. She deserved a proper courtship, time to be sure of her own feelings without the shadow of obligation hanging over them. They talked until the sun began to set, and Phineas reluctantly suggested they should head back before full dark. On the ride to the Morrison Ranch, they made plans for the following Sunday, and Phineas promised to write to her during the week. When they arrived, he helped her dismount, and for a moment they stood close together, neither wanting to step back. "Thank you for today," she said, "for sharing your home with me." "Thank you for coming," he replied, "for giving us, a chance." She reached up and touched his cheek gently, and he covered her hand with his own. Then she was gone, slipping into the house with a final smile over her shoulder. And Phineas rode home, feeling like he was floating several feet off the ground. The weeks that followed established a pattern that became the rhythm of both their lives. Every Sunday, Phineas would collect Amelia from the Morrison Ranch, and they would spend the day together at his ranch or exploring the surrounding countryside. They rode to hidden meadows and climbed to viewpoints where they could see for miles. They had picnics by streams and spent long afternoons talking about everything under the sun. During the week, they wrote letters, sometimes several in a week. Phineas found himself looking forward to the mail with an eagerness that made him feel like a schoolboy. Amelia wrote about her students, about the books she was reading, about her thoughts and dreams. He wrote about the ranch, about his horses, about the life he was building, and his hopes for the future. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. What had started as attraction and mutual respect grew into something richer and more profound. Phineas found himself falling in love with everything about Amelia, her quick intelligence, her dry sense of humor, the way she was patient with the Morrison children, but firm when needed, her fierce independence, and the vulnerability she showed only to him. One Sunday in late October, they were sitting by the creek on his property, watching leaves drift past on the current, when Amelia leaned her head on his shoulder. It was the most intimate gesture she had allowed herself, and Phineas held perfectly still, afraid to break the moment. "I never thought I would feel this way about anyone," she said quietly. "I had convinced myself that my life would be dedicated to teaching, that companionship would come from books and students, not from a partner. I told myself I did not need that kind of love." "What changed?" he asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "I met a man who climbed into a ravine without a second thought," she said, lifting her head to look at him. "A man who carried me up on his own back and asked for nothing in return. A man who sees me as I am and values me for it, who does not want to change me or cage me, but simply wants to be beside me." "Amelia," he said, cupping her face in his hands, "I love you. I have loved you for months now, but I did not want to speak too soon or make you feel pressured. But I cannot hold it in any longer. I love you, and I want to build a life with you, if you will have me." "I love you too," she whispered, and then his lips were on hers, and the world narrowed to just the two of them, the taste of her kiss, the feel of her in his arms. It was sweet and perfect, and everything he had dreamed of during the long nights at the ranch. When they finally drew apart, both were smiling, and Phineas felt like his heart might burst from happiness. "Will you marry me, Amelia Foster? I know I should ask properly, with a ring and a better setting, but I cannot wait another moment. Will you be my wife?" "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, Phineas O'Donnell, I will marry you. I would marry you tomorrow if it were possible." "Then we will make it possible," he said, pulling her close again. "As soon as we can arrange it. I do not want to wait any longer than necessary to make you my wife." They told Mrs. Chen first when they returned to the ranch, and the housekeeper's face split into a wide smile. "About time," she said. "I have been watching you two dance around each other for months. When is the wedding?" "As soon as it can be arranged," Phineas said, his arm around Amelia's waist. "Will you help us plan it?" "Of course," Mrs. Chen said. "Every wedding needs someone practical to make sure things actually happen." When Phineas took Amelia back to the Morrison ranch that evening, they told that family as well. Mrs. Morrison embraced Amelia warmly and declared that she was losing the best governess she had ever had, but gaining lovely neighbors. Mr. Morrison shook Phineas's hand and offered the use of their home for the wedding if they wished. "We would be honored," Amelia said. "Thank you for your kindness." The wedding was planned for late November, giving them just over 3 weeks to prepare. Amelia gave notice to the Morrisons, though she agreed to continue teaching the children until the wedding day. She spent her spare time sewing her wedding dress, a simple but elegant creation in cream silk that Mrs. Morrison helped her with. Phineas worked on expanding the main house, adding a proper bedroom, and improving the kitchen, wanting everything to be ready for his bride. He also rode into Eureka and spent a significant portion of his savings on a gold wedding band, simple and unadorned but of good quality. He wanted Amelia to have something beautiful to wear, a symbol of his commitment to her. The night before the wedding, Phineas lay awake in his small house, hardly able to believe that tomorrow Amelia would become his wife. He thought about the day they had met, how he had looked down into that ravine and seen her hanging there, fighting for her life. If that bridge had not collapsed, if he had ridden past 10 minutes earlier or later, they never would have met. The randomness of it was staggering, but Phineas chose to believe it was fate, that somehow they had been meant to find each other. The wedding day dawned clear and cool, perfect autumn weather. Phineas dressed in his best suit, a dark wool affair he had bought specially for the occasion, and rode to the Morrison ranch with Mrs. Chen beside him in the wagon. A small group of guests had been invited. Amelia's aunt from Eureka, a few neighboring ranchers, the Morrison family, and several of the ranch hands who had become friends to Phineas over the years. The ceremony took place in the Morrisons' large parlor, with a traveling preacher officiating. Phineas stood at the front, his heart hammering, and then Amelia appeared in the doorway, and every thought fled his mind. She was radiant in her cream dress, her dark hair pinned up with small white flowers, her face glowing with happiness. When she walked toward him and placed her hand in his, Phineas felt tears prick his eyes. The vows were traditional, promising to love and honor each other in sickness and health, for richer or poorer, until death parted them. When Phineas slipped the gold band onto Amelia's finger, his hand was steady, and his voice was clear as he promised to love her for the rest of his days. When she repeated the vows back to him, he heard the same certainty and commitment in her voice. "You may kiss your bride," the preacher said, and Phineas gathered Amelia into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, not caring that everyone was watching. She was his wife now, his partner, his love, and he wanted the whole world to know it. The celebration that followed was joyful and heartfelt. Mrs. Chen had prepared a feast with the help of the Morrison cook, and there was music and dancing and laughter. Phineas danced with his new wife under the late autumn sun, holding her close and marveling at how much his life had changed in the space of 3 months. As the sun began to set, Phineas and Amelia said their goodbyes and climbed into the wagon for the ride to their ranch, their home. Mrs. Chen had tactfully arranged to spend the night with her niece in town, giving them privacy. The house was warm when they arrived, with a fire burning in the hearth and flowers on the table. Phineas carried Amelia over the threshold, both of them laughing, and set her down gently in their home. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Donnell," he said, and the name sounded perfect on his lips. "Home," she repeated, looking around at the small, neat rooms. "Yes, this is home now." She turned to him, her eyes soft with love. "Our home, our life, our future." That night, they came together as husband and wife, learning the shape and feel of each other with tenderness and passion. Phineas had never felt closer to another human being, never felt more complete. As he held Amelia in his arms afterward, listening to her breathing even out in sleep, he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for that collapsed bridge, that moment of crisis that had brought this extraordinary woman into his life. The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and deep happiness. Amelia threw herself into making their house a home, adding curtains and rugs and all the small touches that made a place comfortable. She started a proper garden, determined to grow vegetables and herbs to supplement their meals. She also continued to teach, not for pay, but out of love of education, offering lessons to the ranch hands' children and anyone else in the area who wanted to learn. Phineas expanded his operation, buying more cattle and building better facilities. With Amelia beside him, he felt capable of anything. She was his partner in every sense, helping with the books, offering opinions on ranch decisions, even learning to help with the horses despite her lack of experience. He taught her to ride better, to rope, to handle cattle, and she proved to be a quick study. They had their challenges, of course. The first winter was hard, with heavy snows that made travel difficult and threatened the livestock. Phineas spent long, exhausting days breaking ice on water troughs and ensuring the animals had food. Amelia kept the home fires burning, literally and figuratively, making sure he had hot meals and warm clothes when he came in from the brutal cold. In the spring, Amelia discovered she was pregnant, and Phineas felt a joy so profound it almost frightened him. He became ridiculously protective, trying to prevent her from doing any work that might be too strenuous. Amelia tolerated this for about a week before sitting him down and firmly explaining that she was pregnant, not an invalid, and that she intended to continue living her life normally. "I appreciate your concern," she said, taking his hands in hers, "but you must trust me to know my own limits. I promise I will be careful, but I will not spend the next several months sitting idle while you and Mrs. Chen do everything." "I just want you and the baby to be safe," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We will be," she promised. "We are strong, both of us. This child comes from strong stock on both sides." Their son was born on a cold December night in 1879, with Mrs. Chen serving as midwife. Phineas paced the kitchen, listening to the sounds from the bedroom and feeling more helpless than he ever had in his life. When Mrs. Chen finally emerged and told him he had a healthy son and that Amelia was doing well, he nearly collapsed with relief. He entered the bedroom to find Amelia sitting up, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. "Come meet your son," she said softly. Phineas approached almost reverently and looked down at the small, red-faced creature in her arms. The baby had a shock of dark hair and was making small mewling sounds. When Phineas reached out a tentative finger and the baby's tiny hand closed around it, he felt his heart crack open in a new way. "He is perfect," Phineas whispered. "You are perfect. Thank you, Amelia. Thank you for this gift." They named him Peter, after Phineas's father, and he became the center of their world. Phineas discovered a capacity for tenderness he had not known he possessed, spending hours just watching his son sleep, marveling at tiny fingers and toes. Amelia nursed the baby while reading books, already planning his future education. Life settled into a new rhythm with a child in the house. The ranch continued to prosper, and Phineas hired additional help so he could spend more time with his family. Peter grew from a tiny infant into a robust baby, who laughed easily and seemed fascinated by everything around him. By his first birthday, he was toddling around the ranch, chasing chickens and getting into everything. 2 years after Peter's birth, Amelia gave birth to their second child, a daughter they named Alice. She had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes, and she was a calm, observant baby who seemed content to watch the world go by. Peter was initially suspicious of this new addition, but quickly became a devoted big brother, always wanting to help with his sister. The O'Donnell Ranch continued to grow and thrive. By 1885, Phineas had tripled his herd size and gained a reputation for breeding excellent ranch horses. Amelia had become a respected figure in the community, known for her educational efforts and her work helping other ranch wives learn to read and write. Their home was often filled with neighbors and friends, and they hosted an annual summer gathering that became an anticipated event. Through it all, their love for each other only deepened. Phineas never forgot that he had found Amelia by chance, that he had climbed into that ravine without thinking and emerged with the love of his life. He made sure to tell her regularly how much she meant to him, how grateful he was for their life together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Phineas took Amelia back to the spot where they had first met. The old ravine was still there, though someone had finally built a proper bridge across it. They stood looking down into the drop, now safely behind a railing, and Phineas put his arm around his wife. "Do you ever think about that day?" he asked. "Often," she admitted. "I think about how terrified I was, hanging from that root. I think about how I looked up and saw you at the top, this stranger who was willing to risk his life for someone he did not even know. I think about how you climbed down without hesitation. I could not have done anything else," he said simply. "The thought of not helping you, of letting you fall, was impossible. Even then, before I knew you, I think some part of me recognized you." "Recognized me?" "As the person I was meant to find," he said. "As the person I was meant to love." Amelia turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. She was 35 now, with a few strands of silver in her dark hair and fine lines at the corners of her eyes. But to Phineas, she was more beautiful than ever. The years had only enhanced her beauty, adding depth and character to her features. "I love you, Phineas O'Donnell," she said. "I loved you when you pulled me from that ravine, though I did not know it yet. I loved you when you asked me to marry you by the creek. I loved you when you held our children for the first time, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you, Amelia O'Donnell," he replied, kissing her softly. "My brave, brilliant wife, who was worth climbing into a ravine for, worth any risk, any sacrifice. You were the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there together, looking out over the landscape they both loved, thinking about the past and the future. They had built a good life together, a life of meaning and purpose and deep connection. They had 2 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, and a community that valued them. But more than any of that, they had each other, a love forged in crisis and strengthened through years of partnership. As they walked back to their horses, Phineas took Amelia's hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It was a simple gesture, one they had done thousands of times, but it never failed to fill him with contentment. This was his life now, walking hand in hand with the woman he loved, heading home to their children and their ranch and all the days yet to come. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows, as all lives do. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1887, and they mourned the loss of the woman who had been so instrumental in their household. Peter and Alice grew into bright, capable young people who helped on the ranch and excelled in their studies. Phineas expanded his operation even further, becoming one of the most respected ranchers in the region. In 1890, when Phineas was 38 and Amelia was 36, they welcomed a surprise 3rd child, another son they named Paul. Peter and Alice, now 11 and 9 respectively, were thrilled with their baby brother, and the house once again rang with the sounds of an infant. Phineas joked that he would be an old man by the time this one was grown, but secretly he was delighted to have another child to raise alongside Amelia. The 1890s brought change to Northern California. The railroad expanded, bringing easier access to markets and supplies. More settlers arrived, and the wild frontier of Phineas's youth gradually gave way to more established communities. Eureka grew from a rough mining town into a proper city with schools, churches, and all the trappings of civilization. Through all these changes, the O'Donnell Ranch remained a constant, a place of stability and family. Phineas and Amelia watched their children grow with pride and occasional exasperation. Peter showed a natural aptitude for ranching and declared his intention to stay and eventually take over the operation. Alice proved to be an artist, spending hours sketching the landscape and animals around her. Young Paul was still too small to show his inclinations, but he was a cheerful, curious child who followed his older siblings everywhere. On a warm summer evening in 1895, 17 years after their first meeting, Phineas and Amelia sat on their porch watching the sun set over their land. Peter was out checking the cattle, Alice was in her room drawing, and Paul was finally asleep after a day of endless energy. It was a moment of quiet in their busy lives, and they savored it. "Do you ever regret it?" Phineas asked suddenly. "Giving up your independence, your teaching career, to be a rancher's wife?" Amelia looked at him in surprise. "Where is this coming from?" "I was thinking about the day we met," he said, "about how determined you were to make your own way, to have your own future. You gave that up when you married me." "No," she said firmly. "I did not give anything up. I chose a different path, a better path. I am still myself, Phineas. I still teach, still read, still have my own thoughts and dreams. But now I share them with you, with our children. My life is richer and fuller than it ever could have been alone. You are certain?" She took his hand, the same hand that had pulled her from the ravine all those years ago. "I have never been more certain of anything. You gave me more than my life that day, though I did not realize it at the time. You gave me a future I had not imagined, a love I had not thought possible. Our life together is the greatest adventure I could have asked for." Phineas pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I feel the same way. Every day with you is a gift." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky. From inside the house, they could hear Alice humming softly to herself as she worked on her drawings. In the distance, they could hear Peter's voice calling to the cattle. Paul snored softly in his room. These were the sounds of their life, their family, their home. As the years rolled on into the new century, the O'Donnell family continued to thrive. Peter married a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property in 1902, bringing new energy and ideas to the ranch. Alice moved to San Francisco to study art seriously. Though she returned home often, Paul grew into a thoughtful young man with a love of books that reminded Phineas of his mother. Phineas and Amelia gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Peter take over more responsibilities. They had earned their rest, though neither was content to be completely idle. Amelia continued her educational work, now teaching through a small school they had helped establish in Eureka. Phineas spent his time training horses, which had always been his first love. In 1908, 30 years after that fateful day at the ravine, they became grandparents for the first time when Peter and his wife welcomed a son. Holding the tiny baby, Phineas was transported back to the day Peter was born, remembering his own fear and wonder at becoming a father. Now he was a grandfather, another generation carrying forward the O'Donnell name. "We have been blessed," he said to Amelia that night as they prepared for bed in the house they had shared for so many years. "More than I ever dreamed possible." "We have," she agreed, settling beside him. At 54, she was still beautiful to him, her hair now more silver than dark, her face lined with the evidence of a life well lived. "We built something good, Phineas, not just the ranch, but a family, a legacy." "Because of you," he said. "Because you said yes when I asked you to marry me. Because you took a chance on a rancher you barely knew. Because you climbed into a ravine without a second thought," she countered. "Because you were the kind of man who would risk everything for a stranger. That is when I started falling in love with you, even if I did not recognize it immediately." They lay in the darkness, hands clasped between them, thinking about all the years behind them and whatever years remained ahead. They had built a good life together, exactly the kind of life they had dreamed of during those early courtship days. The ranch was prosperous and would continue under Peter's capable management. Their children were happy and settled in their own lives. Their grandchild was healthy, and would grow up surrounded by love and stability. But more than any of these achievements, they had their love, which had only grown stronger over the decades. The passion of early romance had mellowed into a deep, abiding affection, a partnership so complete that they often knew what the other was thinking without words. They had weathered storms, both literal and figurative, supported each other through loss, and celebrated each other's triumphs. They had raised 3 children together, built a ranch together, created a life together. As Phineas drifted off to sleep, his last thought was of gratitude. Gratitude for that collapsed bridge, for being in the right place at the right time, for having the courage to climb into that ravine. Because in saving Amelia's life, he had saved his own, finding a purpose and a love that had defined everything that came after. The years continued their steady march forward. More grandchildren arrived, filling the ranch with new life and laughter. Alice married an art dealer from San Francisco in 1912, and Paul became a teacher, following in his mother's footsteps. The O'Donnell Ranch celebrated its 50th anniversary in 1913, and nearly 100 people came to celebrate, a testament to the respect and affection the family had earned in the community. On their 40th wedding anniversary in 1918, during the difficult days of the Great War, Phineas and Amelia returned once more to the ravine where they had first met. They were 66 and 64 now, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work, but their love was as strong as ever. 40 years, Amelia marveled, looking down into the ravine. It seems like yesterday and a lifetime ago, all at once. The best 40 years of my life, Phineas said. Every day with you has been a gift, Amelia, every single day. Even the hard ones, she teased gently. The blizzards and droughts and all the times I burned dinner when we were first married. Especially those, he said seriously, because we faced them together. That is what marriage means, what love means, being there for each other when things are difficult, not just when they are easy. They stood in silence for a moment, both thinking about the journey they had traveled together, from that terrifying moment when Amelia had hung in the ravine, through the joys and sorrows of 40 years of marriage. They had been partners in the truest sense. Thank you, Amelia said finally, for climbing into that ravine, for being the kind of man who would do such a thing. My life began that day, truly began, and everything good that has happened since has been because you were brave enough to save me. Our lives began that day, Phineas corrected, pulling her close. Both of us. I was just existing before, just going through the motions. You gave me a reason to live, not just survive. You gave me love and family and purpose. We gave those things to each other, she said, resting her head against his shoulder in the familiar gesture that still brought him comfort. That is what makes it so perfect. We saved each other. They stood together in the fading afternoon light, 2 people who had built a lifetime together, who had created something beautiful and lasting from a moment of crisis. The ravine below them was just a geographical feature, rocks and earth and scrubby plants, but to them it was sacred ground, the place where their story had begun. As they walked back to their horses, moving more slowly than they once had but still steady, Phineas looked at his wife and felt the same surge of love he had felt when he first pulled her to safety all those years ago. Some things diminished with time, but his love for Amelia Foster O'Donnell was not one of them. If anything, it had grown, deepening and expanding to encompass all the years they had shared, all the moments both grand and ordinary that had made up their life together. The O'Donnell family continued to grow and flourish through the 1920s and into the 1930s. Phineas and Amelia became great-grandparents, watching with joy as yet another generation of O'Donnells came into the world. The ranch adapted to changing times, incorporating new technologies while maintaining the values and work ethic that had built it. Through everything, Phineas and Amelia remained the heart of the family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their children and grandchildren looked to them as examples of what love and commitment could achieve, how 2 people working together could create something that outlasted them both. In the summer of 1935, the O'Donnell Ranch held a massive celebration for Phineas and Amelia's 57th wedding anniversary. The entire family gathered, 3 generations strong, along with friends and neighbors from throughout the region. There was food and music and dancing, stories and laughter, and the joy of being surrounded by people you loved. As the sun set on that perfect summer evening, Phineas and Amelia sat in chairs that had been specially set up for them, watching their family celebrate, Peter was there with his wife and 4 children, now grown with children of their own. Alice had come from San Francisco with her husband and 3 children. Paul was there with his wife and 2 daughters. And surrounding all of them were great-grandchildren, the youngest generation of O'Donnells running and playing and filling the air with their laughter. "We did this," Amelia said softly, her hand clasped in Phineas's. "You and I, we created all of this." "The best thing I ever did," Phineas replied, his voice thick with emotion, "was climb into that ravine 57 years ago. Everything good in my life came from that single moment of decision." "And the best thing I ever did was trust you," Amelia said. "Trust that a stranger who risked his life for mine would be worth building a life with. I was right to trust you, Phineas. You have never let me down, not once in all these years." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the celebration swirl around them. The ranch they had built together, the family they had created, the love they had nurtured, all of it was there in front of them, living and breathing proof that their life together had mattered. They had taken the gift of those extra years that fate had given them when Phineas pulled Amelia from the ravine, and they had made something beautiful with them. As the stars came out and the party continued around them, Phineas leaned over and kissed his wife, just as he had done thousands of times over the past 57 years. And as always, he felt the same spark, the same connection, the same absolute certainty that she was the person he was meant to be with. "I love you, Amelia O'Donnell," he whispered against her lips. "And I love you, Phineas O'Donnell," she whispered back. "Today, tomorrow, and for whatever time we have left. You are my heart, my partner, my everything." They lived several more good years together, years filled with family and love and the quiet contentment of a life well lived. They watched their great-grandchildren grow, saw new babies born, celebrated weddings and anniversaries. They spent their days sitting on the porch they had sat on for decades, holding hands and watching the sun set over the land they loved. When Phineas passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1939, at the age of 87, with Amelia beside him holding his hand, his last thought was of the moment when he had looked down into the ravine and seen her hanging there. How lucky he had been, he thought, to be in the right place at the right time. How blessed he had been to have spent 61 years loving this remarkable woman. Amelia lived another 3 years after Phineas's death, surrounded by her family at the ranch they had built together. She spent her days telling stories about their life together to anyone who would listen, making sure that the younger generations knew how their family had begun, with a man climbing into a ravine without a second thought to save a woman he had never met. When she joined Phineas in 1942, at the age of 88, she went peacefully, a small smile on her face. Her last words were of him, of the love they had shared, of the life they had built. "He climbed into the ravine for me," she told her granddaughter, who sat beside her bed. "And he carried me up on his own back, and then he carried me through life, and I carried him. And together we were stronger than either of us could have been alone." The O'Donnell Ranch continued for generations after them, each new generation learning the story of Phineas and Amelia, of how their great-great-grandparents had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances. The ravine where it all began became a family landmark, a place of pilgrimage where O'Donnells came to remember their roots and the love that had started it all. The story of the cowboy who climbed into the ravine without a second thought, who carried her up on his own back, became family legend, passed down through the decades. But more than just a dramatic rescue, it was a story about love, about trust, about 2 people who found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. It was a story about how a single moment of courage and compassion could change the trajectory of lives, creating ripples that spread through generations. In the end, Phineas and Amelia's legacy was not just the ranch they built or the children they raised, but the love they showed, the partnership they forged, and the proof they provided that true love, the deep and abiding kind, was not just a fantasy, but something real and achievable. They had shown their family what it meant to commit to another person completely, to face life's challenges together, to build something lasting through hard work and devotion. The small cemetery on a hill overlooking the O'Donnell Ranch held their graves, side by side, as they had lived, the headstones simple but dignified. Visitors still came to pay their respects, family members who wanted to honor the couple who had started it all, and occasional strangers who had heard the story and wanted to see where it had ended. But the real monument to Phineas and Amelia was not made of stone. It was the thriving ranch, the large and loving family, the community they had helped build, and the countless lives they had touched over the decades. It was every O'Donnell who grew up hearing the story and learning that love was worth fighting for, that taking chances on people could lead to the greatest rewards, and that sometimes the most important thing you could do was climb into a ravine without a second thought for someone who needed you. Their story became more than just a family tale. It became a reminder that life could change in an instant, that courage and compassion mattered, and that love, real love, was the foundation upon which everything else worth having was built. The cowboy and the governess, brought together by chance and held together by choice, had shown everyone who knew them what was possible when two people committed to facing life together. And so, the story ended not with sadness, but with fulfillment, with the knowledge that two lives had been lived fully and well, that love had triumphed, that family had flourished, and that a simple act of heroism on a dusty California trail in 1878 had resulted in decades of happiness, generations of family, and a legacy that would endure long after the last person who had known them personally had passed away. Phineas and Amelia O'Donnell had built something eternal together, and that was the happiest ending of all.